Hello everyone, Mark here, Mark's Max Muscle, and today we are going to take a look at some mass monsters, some large bodybuilders. If you are familiar with the sport, then you realize the 1990s really ushered in this mass monster era, and here's three very well-known giants of the sport. Kevin Levrone, he was no twinkle toes. Nasser El-Body, one of the biggest, and Paul Dillette there. He probably was the biggest. I mean, these guys were massive, but most of you probably have heard of these guys. These are some pretty well-known bodybuilders, placed fairly high at the Olympia level. Today, we are going to take a look at some relative unknowns. And I know I may have titled this Bodybuilders That You Never Heard Of, but I am sure most of my die-hard fans have heard of at least 90% of these guys. But for the general public, they really have not heard of these mass monsters. And we're going to begin with this gentleman here. And I made sure I talked long enough to give you guys the chance to, if you're watching this with your friends, shout the guy's name out. A little bit more familiar of a picture of him here. This is Akim Albrecht. And he was a giant of a man, nearly 6 feet tall and close to 300 pounds in that off season. Of course, he would have been a few pounds lighter for his stage weight, but he is huge, guys. And this might not look like the biggest bodybuilder you've ever seen, but this was 1991, and there was really nobody in sight that was bigger than Dorian Yates or Lee Haney. But this guy was never really compared with those two, was he? And it's a shame. And that was before Dorian got really massive. So this was truly a mass monster for its time. Food for thought, he took 9th here at the 91 Olympia. He was prepping for the 92 Olympia, where actually, in my opinion, he would have made a name for himself. He tore his bicep, so he was out. Man, look at the size of those legs. Incredible, incredible. He did continue on in his career, but I really think that torn bicep really affected his placings. He placed 16th at the 1994 Mr. Olympia. So with the writing on the walls, he left the sport of bodybuilding for the wacky world of professional wrestling. He was known as Brauchus. If I'm not mistaken, he was another gimmick or another handle as well, but as far as I know, he was Brauchus in the WWF. I remember that. It was WWE now, but back then it was WWF. Anyway, in my opinion, he was a far better bodybuilder than a professional wrestler, and I really think at one point he could have been, or he was a future Mr. Olympia, or he had the potential to be a future Mr. Olympia champion. Now for that darn torn bicep can really affect your career. All right, let's have a look at the next gentleman, and like everybody on this video, this guy was massive. This guy was huge. Look at the size of the delts on him and the arms, pecs, legs. Well, I guess that's what makes up a mass monster. And yes, I am giving you guys enough time to see if you can guess his name. Anybody get this at home? You should be proud of yourself. Alqi Gurley, what an incredible physical specimen. And look at the back. So he was not only huge from the front, but he had a big, thick, massive back to match. Look at the traps. Look at the traps. Alqi Gurley really hit the scene, I believe, in 1990. I think that was the year he took the NPC Nationals. If I'm not mistaken, I believe it was 90 or 91. I think it was 90. And this guy was more than just a mass monster. He had some intense body parts. Look at that, like I mentioned earlier, the delts, but look at the triceps. Look at them big, full triceps. And if you'll glance down at the wheels, some of the finest cuts you will ever see. But make no mistake about it, this guy was as big as a house. Here he is. I don't know if he's dwarfing Nasser El-Body, but he's definitely giving him a run for his money as far as size is concerned. And keep in mind, Nasser, one of the biggest giants in bodybuilding history. Alqi made his Mr. Olympia debut 1992. Here he is dwarfing the 300-pound Lou Ferrigno. He placed lucky number 13th, and then he competed one more time on the grandest stage of them all in 1994. Did a little bit better. He placed 11th, but I mean, that was it for his Olympia career, and hey, if you can't win at the Olympia, you might as well pack it in, and that's what he did in 1999. But man, oh man, for those of you who never heard of Alqi Gurley, take a look, guys. This guy was not only a mass monster, but he was very complete and quite aesthetically pleasing, if I do say so myself. Now let's turn our attention towards the next gentleman. And as you can plainly see, this dude deserves to be on this video. His arm alone, that is a mass monster tricep, if I have ever seen one. That is Rolly Winkler-like, yeah, or Phil Heath-like even. And yes, I am stalling for time, giving you guys a chance. Anybody recognize this dude? Anybody get it? Well, here's a huge hint. Boom. Superset Man. Boom. This guy is not even known for his arms. It's Quadzilla, Paul DeMeo. And probably a good percentage of you guys have heard of this guy. But for the general public, keep that in mind, guys. For the general public, or if you're new to the sport of bodybuilding, probably have not heard of Paul DeMeo. But he was Quadzilla, and you can plainly see why. This guy's legs were on another level. But like I began showing, this guy's arms, they were pretty much matching the development of his legs, which is unbelievable, or as unbelievable as that is. Have a look. I don't see any weaknesses. The tricep, the bicep, it's as big as, or bigger, I should say, than anybody that I've ever seen. Even Lee Priest. Turn him around, and he had a back to match. Look at the size of the back, and the wheels, my goodness. The wheels, calves included. Makes you wonder why this guy never became an Olympia champion, or even a top 2 or 3 Olympia contender. Well, he competed only once at the Olympia. I believe it was a special invite. And he was massive. He was truly as big as a house. But as you can see, it was down to conditioning, I believe. There was guys like Charles Claremont, who packed on a heck of a lot of muscle in his own right by 94. And a guy like Ronnie Coleman in the background, he was ever growing as well. And I believe that Paul DeMeo, he placed right underneath of those two. So discouraged, in my opinion, from that, he called it quits. And unfortunately, it was a spiral downward for Paul DeMeo. And he had some demons, and he left us in 2005. But let us never forget Quadzilla. At one time, he had the biggest legs out there on any bodybuilding stage that he ever stepped foot on. Now let us direct our attention towards this gentleman, and as the Tominator often says, as wide as a barn door, this guy is as wide as that barn, I think. Anybody get this guy? Anybody know his name? Very little is known about this guy. Not too many videos put out on him either. This is Ian Harrison, a mass monster from the mid to late 90s. And much like Quadzilla, he had a back to match as well. And keep in mind, they didn't really bow their quads out at that time. He's basically holding his feet forward. And you could see that quad bulging out. Could you imagine if he were to sweep it out like they do nowadays? What a giant. And to give you the impression on how big and hard and grainy this guy was, look at him compared to Kevin Levrone and Nasser El Sanbadi. He was truly a giant. And this was when Kevin Levrone was massive. And I gotta say, that hard grainy nature of Ian Harrison is maybe the best out there. Much like Quadzilla, Ian Harrison made his Olympia debut in 1995, and much like Paul as well, he placed fairly low. He placed way down in 14th. There was so many mass monsters around at that time, and some aesthetically pleasing ones at that. But Ian Harrison, guys, when you look at that quad development, pecs, delts, arms, this guy definitely deserves to be mentioned as a mass monster from the 1990s. We will finish this video off with this gentleman, and he is probably the most well-known on this video, on this list. Anybody get this? This one here, you should be ashamed of yourself if you didn't get this guy. But of course, for the general public and the newbies to the sport, you guys don't have any idea who this guy is. It's Jeanpierre Fuchs, or Jeanpierre Fuchs, Jean Bidon. He was huge. He was huge. Cartoonish. Just unbelievable proportions, and much like a couple of these guys, had a back to match. Actually, he was ginormous from the front, and his back was even ginormouser. Both shots as well. At one point in time, people even claimed that he had a better back than Dorian Yates himself. He competed several times at the Olympia, so he doesn't really fit the mold for the criteria of this video, but he placed, I think, low enough that we can throw him in this list. He placed 8th in 1996. He placed up to 7th in 1997, which was his highest placing. Then in 98, he dropped down to 10th, and finally down to 16th in 1999. This guy dwarfed anybody that he even came in contact with. Look at him making Dorian Yates look like Tinkerbell, and Lee Priest even smaller. That's unbelievable. Nobody was safe, not even Ronnie Coleman. And Ronnie Coleman, no small potatoes at this point in time. If you do know Jeanpierre Fuchs, it is probably because of this. He injured himself. It was a terrible injury, but it was unlike most injuries. It was all caught on tape. It was during a photo shoot, and he did not like to use fake weights, fake plates. He had nearly 700 pounds on there. Some say 675. He says 700. It was a lot of weight. I wouldn't argue with the guy. But anyway, goes without saying, his bodybuilding career was over. It was kaput. But let us never forget, like all of these guys, that this guy was generally the biggest guy out there on the stage. And it was during the mass monster era. So not too many guys in the history of bodybuilding, structurally speaking, were ever even close to the size of Jeanpierre Fuchs. And that will about do it for that one. I hope you guys enjoyed this. And if it gets enough thumbs ups, we'll say around 600 thumbs ups, I will do a similar video for the 2010s, or just the 2000s, I guess. And I have a few big giants in mind for that video. And I made one for the 1980s, of course. And carried on with the 1990s, the Mass Monster era. I think they're going to get even bigger for the next video. So go ahead, hit thumbs up. There's 5 guys here. The next 5, or might even be more for the next video, will be even bigger. Hit thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. Have a great day.